The moment Linda stepped into Desert Star Motors, the cold glint of judgment hit harder than the Nevada sun outside. Plain dress, worn sandals, an old purse. She looked like anyone but the person who could change everything here. But Linda wasn't here to blend in. She was here to shatter expectations. Stick around, hit subscribe, and join me to uncover how one woman flipped the script on power and prejudice. The moment Linda pushed through the glass doors, a wave of cold air hit her skin. So sharp it was almost a shock after the relentless Nevada heat. She took a breath, steadying herself. This wasn't just any visit. Not for her. Not today. Her. Eyes scanned the showroom. Gleaming floors stretched out, reflecting rows of shiny new cars. Luxury models with smooth curves, leather seats, and polished chrome that sparkled under the bright lights. The smell of new leather and fresh paint was thick in the air, but it felt hollow to Linda. It didn't invite her in. It didn't promise warmth or welcome. Instead, she noticed the eyes. Not the friendly kind, but those quick, calculating glances that darted across her figure, sizing her up, whispering silent judgments. A mix of curiosity and quiet disdain. Some faces barely masked their surprise that someone like her had dared to come here. Someone who didn't fit the picture-perfect image Desert Star Motors preferred. Linda felt the weight of it, a heavy pressure pressing against her chest. Her dress, simple cotton and faded from too many washes. Her sandals scuffed and worn. The battered purse hanging at her side. Nothing about her screamed power or wealth. To the others, she was invisible, or worse, out of place, and that was exactly the point. She moved forward, feet steady on the polished tiles. Each step felt louder than it should, echoing in the silence that followed her like a shadow. Linda's heart raced, but not from fear. It was determination, the kind that burned quietly but fiercely. At the front desk, a small group of employees exchanged subtle smirks. Their eyes flicked between her and the shiny brochures spread out like trophies on the counter. Linda caught a snippet of conversation, words like wrong place, doesn't belong, whispered just loud enough to sting. It was a language she knew well, the language of exclusion. Margaret, the manager, stood nearby, tall and composed. Her posture spoke volumes before she even moved. Linda could almost hear the silent command in Margaret's gaze. "This is my world. You're not welcome here." Linda stopped, forcing herself to breathe evenly. She knew Margaret's type well, the enforcer of rules, the gatekeeper of power. It was people like her who kept others in their place with a smile that didn't reach the eyes and policies that masked prejudice. "I'm here to see the newest electric SUV," Linda said quietly, but with a strength that surprised even herself. "I heard it just arrived." Margaret's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Her smile tightened. "That model is reserved for select clients," she replied smoothly, voice cool but polite. "We require appointments for special viewings." Linda nodded, refusing to let a flicker of frustration slip into her tone. "I understand. Could I at least get a brochure? Maybe a list of available vehicles?" A small group of employees by the coffee station exchanged satisfied glances, as if Margaret's brush-off was a victory in some invisible game. Linda caught their eyes, steady and unyielding. "Of course," Margaret said, pulling a worn list of used cars from under the desk and sliding it toward Linda. "This is what we have available right now." Linda's fingers brushed the paper. It was a collection of tired models, the kind no one bragged about. She glanced up at Margaret, voice calm but direct. "Why only these? I specifically asked about the new electric SUV." Margaret's face twitched, just a flicker of something unspoken. "Policies," she repeated, "and insurance requirements." Linda folded the list slowly, letting the silence stretch between them. The room felt colder now. Whispers grew a little louder. Some customers nearby paused, sensing something more than a routine sale was unfolding. Linda's gaze swept across the showroom, taking in every glance, every whispered word. She wasn't just here for a car. She was here to see what kind of place Desert Star Motors really was, and what she saw unsettled her. It wasn't just the polite rejections or the silent judgment. It was the way power hid in the small things. The unspoken rules, the sideways glances, the invisible barriers built to keep people out. But Linda refused to shrink. Instead, she stood taller. Her quiet strength made Margaret uneasy. The manager's usual control began to slip, her polite voice turning sharper. "Miss, I think you've had your look around," Margaret said finally, voice low but firm. "If you don't have an appointment, I'll have to ask you to leave." The tension in the room snapped. Conversation stopped. Eyes locked on Linda, waiting for her to falter. But she didn't. Linda smiled gently, a smile that carried no apology. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm sure today is a day none of us will forget." Then she turned, her footsteps steady as she walked toward the exit. Behind her, the air shifted. The usual buzz of the showroom dimmed. Something real had cracked the surface, a truth no one wanted to speak aloud. Linda paused at the door. She glanced back once more, locking eyes with Margaret and the watching crowd. She wasn't just a visitor. Not anymore. This was her moment, and she was ready. The gatekeeper's eyes. Margaret's quiet. Storm Margaret watched Linda from across the showroom with a measured calm that barely concealed the storm brewing beneath her surface. As the manager of Desert Star Motors, she had long been the unseen hand shaping every interaction, every decision in this polished palace of cars. To Margaret, order was everything. Rules weren't mere guidelines. They were shields, protecting the dealership from chaos and, more subtly, from people who didn't fit the carefully curated image she had fought to maintain. But today, something was different. The plain dress, the scuffed sandals, the worn purse, symbols that, to Margaret, whispered a story she wasn't ready to hear. This wasn't just a customer. This was a disruption. A question mark in a world that demanded certainty. Her eyes narrowed slightly as Linda approached the front desk, steady and composed. Margaret's usual tight smile didn't soften. Inside, her mind raced. Why here? Why now? She'd built her career on control and efficiency, and now she faced an unexpected challenge, one that unsettled the foundations she'd laid so carefully. Nearby, Tom and Crystal shared a glance, their smirk speaking volumes. Margaret felt the silent approval of their alliance, the comfort of a united front against the unfamiliar. Yet, even as she enforced the dealership's policies, Margaret's heart thudded with a mix of anxiety and something else, a grudging respect for Linda's unshakable calm. The polite refusals, the scheduled appointments, the carefully worded excuses, all felt like fragile walls holding back a tide she hadn't anticipated. She told herself these were just standard procedures, but deep down, Margaret sensed the power in those small moments, the power to decide who belonged and who didn't. As Linda's quiet persistence continued, Margaret's thoughts spiraled. Who is she really? The thought wasn't just professional curiosity, it was a gnawing fear. Because what if Linda wasn't just a visitor? What if she was something more? The tension in the room thickened, and Margaret could feel every gaze shifting between them. She noticed the customers pausing, the hushed whispers growing louder. The fragile order Margaret worked so hard to maintain was cracking. She fought to keep her voice steady when she told Linda to leave, but inside, her grip was slipping. That quiet woman, unyielding, composed, was rewriting the rules with every wordless step. Margaret's mind raced back to every hard-earned lesson she'd learned about leadership, control, and respect. She knew respect was earned through titles, positions, and appearances, and Linda challenged that. Not with anger or defiance, but with something far more disarming, unwavering dignity. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped her clipboard. Every excuse she'd practiced dissolved into a fragile facade, cracking under the weight of Linda's steady gaze. It was as if Linda's presence alone demanded a reckoning Margaret wasn't prepared to face. Margaret's thoughts flickered to her own past, the sacrifices, the compromises made to rise through the ranks. Could she afford to let this moment unravel everything? Could she confront the uncomfortable truth that maybe, just maybe, the power she held was built on shaky ground? As the room grew silent, Margaret's carefully constructed world trembled. She felt the eyes on her, waiting, questioning, silently judging. She realized this wasn't just a test of authority. It was a test of character. And she wasn't. Sure, she was ready. This view from Margaret adds a tense, humanized layer to the story. It reveals the internal conflicts that power and prejudice can create. The fear, the doubts, the resistance to change, all while spotlighting Linda's quiet strength through the eyes of her opposition. Breaking boundaries. The unseen. Battle Linda stood near the gleaming new electric SUV, her fingertips barely grazing its cool, pristine grille. The sleek curves and futuristic design that once seemed distant and untouchable now felt almost within, yet guarded by invisible chains. Margaret's sharp voice sliced through the showroom air like a sudden storm. "Miss, you need to step away from that vehicle immediately." Every head turned. The polished floors reflected tense faces. The soft hum of whispered conversations vanished. The employees who had smirked earlier now stood frozen, caught between loyalty to their manager and the undeniable shift Linda had sparked. Linda met Margaret's gaze steadily. She didn't flinch. There was no anger, no defiance, just a quiet strength that rattled the usual order. "I'm just looking," Linda said softly, voice calm but unwavering. "Isn't that allowed?" Margaret's face tightened, her jaw clenched, beneath a mask of professional composure, but her eyes betrayed a growing frustration. The rules were clear, or at least they were supposed to be, but Linda's simple presence was shaking the very foundation of those unwritten boundaries. Nearby, Tom shifted uneasily, whispering to Crystal. They exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to respond now that the comfortable script had been broken. Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm asking you again. You have to leave." Linda's heart beat steadily, not from fear, but from a resolute calm. This wasn't just about a car. It was about a battle far bigger than any showroom. "I'd like to know," Linda said softly, "who actually decides what happens here? Who holds the power?" The question hung in the air, soft but heavy. It was more than a query. It was a challenge. Margaret's eyes flashed. Her usual confidence faltered for the briefest moment, as if the ground beneath her was shifting. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The room waited, breath held, but the manager only raised her voice, sharp and clipped. "You have to leave. Now." The tension snapped like a taut wire. Customers stopped mid-step. Employees froze. The usual rhythm of the dealership shattered. Linda didn't move. She stood firm, shoulders squared, gaze steady. The silence stretched long and thick. In that moment, Linda wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was the center of a silent storm, a force that refused to be ignored or pushed aside. Margaret's voice echoed again, more forceful this time. "I'm serious, leave. This is your last warning." Whispers erupted in the corners, conversations resumed, but this time with an edge, an undercurrent of unease. Linda slowly nodded, folding her arms calmly. "Thank you," she said, voice low and deliberate. "I'm sure this day won't be forgotten." As she turned to leave, the weight of hundreds of eyes bore down on her. Some held curiosity, others discomfort, and a few grudging respect. But just as Linda reached the doorway, something shifted. She paused, reaching into her purse. From its depths, she pulled out an old flip phone, a relic that seemed almost out of place in the gleaming dealership. Her fingers dialed a number with quiet confidence. Margaret's eyes narrowed. The staff exchanged uneasy looks. Customers leaned in subtly, sensing the quiet power in that simple act. The call was brief, barely a minute, but it carried a thunderous impact. The name Linda spoke sent a ripple through the room. Jonathan Rogers. Margaret's breath caught. The usual smug certainty drained from her face, replaced by sudden unease. Jonathan Rogers, the regional director, the man whose word was law across every dealership in the region, the one everyone at Desert Star Motors both feared and respected. Within moments, the glass doors swung open again. Jonathan entered, his steps steady and deliberate. His eyes swept the room with calm authority. He greeted Linda with a genuine smile and a firm handshake, a moment that shattered the invisible walls that had kept her confined. The room shifted again. Employees who had barely glanced at Linda before now stared openly, uncertain and exposed. Margaret retreated, her usual command diluted into silence. Jonathan's voice cut through the tension as he called everyone to gather. No one dared refuse. Inside the conference room, Linda took the seat at the head of the table, the spot reserved for leadership, for authority. Her presence filled the space, calm but commanding. Jonathan wasted no time. "Linda is the new owner of Desert Star Motors," he announced, voice steady, eyes scanning the room. The room went silent, a silence thick with disbelief, regret, and a dawning realization. Margaret's fingers gripped her notepad so tightly her knuckles turned white. The carefully crafted excuses that had justified exclusion moments before vanished like smoke. Faces flushed with embarrassment. No rushed apology could erase the truth laid bare. In that stillness, Margaret finally broke, her voice shaking. She murmured a fragile apology, acknowledging pressure and misunderstandings, words barely audible but heavy with regret. Linda listened, her eyes steady, her expression unyielding. "I'm not here for revenge," she said softly, voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Respect isn't given because of a title or position. It's earned through how we treat each other." Her words hung in the air, settling like a quiet but firm truth. She asked a simple, piercing question. "If I weren't the owner, would I have been treated the same way?" The question lingered long after the room fell silent again. No one answered. They didn't need to. The realization sank in. Desert Star Motors had built a culture on old habits, invisible barriers and biases that needed to be torn down. Linda's presence was a mirror, reflecting their failings, their prejudices. Yet in that reflection was also a chance to start over, to rebuild. Margaret, still shaken, glanced around the room. The weight of the moment settled on every face. This wasn't just about cars or sales. It was about dignity, human decency, and the courage to change. Final chapter, a new dawn at Desert Star Motors. As the weeks slipped by, Desert Star Motors began to breathe differently. The once cold, rigid atmosphere slowly gave way to something warmer, a shared commitment to respect, dignity, and genuine connection. Linda stood in her new office, sunlight streaming through the wide windows, casting golden reflections on the polished floors below. From here, she could see the entire showroom, not just the cars, but the people who made it come alive. The faces that once glanced away in judgment now met hers with cautious openness. The whispered jokes and sideways stares had faded into quiet conversations and tentative smiles. Change was never easy. Linda knew that. The habits that had held the dealership in a stranglehold for years couldn't vanish overnight. There were moments of tension, awkward apologies, and honest confessions, but there was also hope. Margaret, once so rigid and unyielding, had become one of the loudest voices in championing this new culture. Her apology had been genuine, her willingness to learn remarkable. She'd admitted that her drive to control had blinded her to the humanity behind every interaction. "I never realized how much I was missing," Margaret confessed during one meeting. "I thought toughness kept us strong. Now I see it just kept us apart." The staff meetings Linda held were unlike any before. They weren't about sales targets or profit margins. They were about listening, really listening, about confronting uncomfortable truths and owning mistakes. Chris, who had often kept his head down to avoid conflict, spoke openly about the times he stayed silent instead of standing up for a coworker. Lucy shared her regrets about brushing off ideas from newer team members. Daniel, the finance manager, spoke about seeing people as numbers until Linda's leadership reminded him there was a heart behind every deal. Linda listened to them all, never judging, always encouraging. Her leadership was quiet but firm, a reminder that respect wasn't a gift to be earned but a right to be upheld. She reminded the team, this is about who we are when no one's watching, about the small moments, a smile, a kind word, a moment of understanding. That's what builds a culture worth belonging to. Linda's journey hadn't been about proving herself to others. It was about reclaiming her own dignity and setting a new example for what leadership could be. From the very beginning, she had stepped into a world that wanted to push her out, a world where appearances and assumptions dictated worth. But instead of fighting fire with fire, she showed up with calm, unwavering presence. She showed them all that real power isn't loud or boastful. It's steady. It's rooted in courage, humility, and a relentless belief in fairness. The electric SUV still gleamed under the showroom lights, a symbol not just of innovation in technology, but of transformation in spirit. And Desert Star Motors was no longer just a dealership. It was a community striving to live up to the values Linda embodied. As she walked through the showroom one afternoon, customers were greeted with genuine warmth. Employees paused to help one another, sharing ideas and encouragement. The tension that once hung heavy in the air was replaced by a quiet energy, the energy of people who believed in something better. Linda paused by the front doors, looking out at the Nevada sun dipping low over the horizon. She thought about the journey, the silent stares, the whispered doubts, the moment when she touched that forbidden car and everything changed. She smiled softly, knowing this was just the beginning. The real work was ongoing, breaking down barriers, challenging biases, and building respect one day at a time. But she also knew this: when you lead with integrity and heart, you don't just change a place, you change lives. And that was the greatest drive of all. Key takeaways and reflections. This story isn't just about one woman standing up in a car dealership. It's about confronting the invisible walls that keep us divided, the judgments we make, the biases we carry, and the courage it takes to break through. Linda's journey teaches us that true leadership is not about titles or appearances. It's about showing up, standing firm in who you are, and treating others with dignity even when it's hard. Margaret's transformation reminds us that change requires humility and openness. No matter how long we've held power or how set we are in our ways, we can always choose to listen, learn, and grow. And the entire team's willingness to face uncomfortable truths shows the power of honest conversation, the kind that builds bridges instead of walls. Final thought: in a world often divided by what we see on the surface, this story is a powerful reminder that what truly matters is what's inside. The respect we give, the kindness we show, and the courage we carry. Linda's quiet strength ignited a change that went far beyond a dealership. It sparked hope that every one of us can challenge old prejudices, embrace empathy, and build communities where everyone belongs. And that, above all, is a story worth telling.